I'm Sergeant Towery with the Lexington Police Department, and we have a major update and an unsolved homicide investigation that we'd like to share with you. For the last 27 years, detectives have continued to follow up on leads, tips, and evidence in connection with the homicide death of 43-year-old Linda Rutledge. And we can now say that the suspect has been identified and the case has been solved, finally bringing justice to Linda and her family. The suspect was identified as Robert Eugene Brashers, who's been deceased since January of 1999. But through DNA and ballistic evidence testing, he was determined to be responsible for Linda's death. If he were alive today, he'd be arrested and charged with murder along with other charges. Solving cases like this take all of us working together, and this one would not have been possible for us to solve without the assistance and help from Austin, Texas Police Department, the Texas Office of Attorney General, the City of Austin Forensic Science Department, the Kentucky State Police Forensic Laboratory, DNA Labs International, the ATF, the FBI, and the Lexington Fire Department. We want to thank them for their assistance and teamwork in helping bring justice to Linda and her family. We also want to thank our detectives, Forensic Service Unit, and investigators who remain dedicated and continue to work on this case for the past 27 years. Looking over notes, re-entering evidence, following up on leads and tips, and researching how new technology can help further the investigation. Because you never gave up, we now know who killed Linda Rutledge. But most importantly, we want to honor Linda. Her life was cut short after just 43 years, and her family has had to live with the pain of losing her and not knowing who took her life. While her case may be solved, it doesn't bring Linda back. But we hope that by knowing who killed her, her loved ones can begin to heal. We've spoken with Linda's family, and they've asked that the media and the public respect their privacy during this time. Now join our Crime Stoppers coordinator, Detective Kristen Klingshorn, as she sits down with the case detective, Detective John Davis, and Bureau of Investigation clerk and retired police commander Ann Whitty, to learn more about this case and how it was solved.
I'm Detective Kristen Klingshorn. I am the Lexington Police Department's Bluegrass Crime Stoppers coordinator, and today I am here with retired Commander Ann Whitty and Detective John Davis to talk about the murder of Linda Rutledge and how the department has solved this 27-year-old case. Can you give us a brief overview of the case?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, hopefully this is the first of many of these that we're going to be able to do. Linda's case to Ann and I means a great deal to be able to get to this point where we can have hers our first big breakthrough case that we've solved. So November 7th, 1998 basically started out like any other morning here in Lexington. On 121 Malibu Drive at the Nixon Hearing Aid Center, somebody was passing by. They happened to notice that there was smoke coming from the back side of that building. They called 911 and the Lexington Fire Department thankfully showed up very, very quickly for that. And we'll go into detail on that just a little bit later, but they were able to arrive very quickly. They were able to put out that fire, and then during the course of extinguishing that fire, they located a deceased female inside of the building. At the time, they didn't know who she was, but based on later investigation, they were able to determine that 43-year-old Linda Rutledge was the victim located inside there. Linda's body was taken for autopsy. They found that she had sustained 2 gunshot wounds to the head and had also had some internal injuries consistent with some blunt force trauma. So her death was ruled a homicide, and the investigation started moving in that direction.
What evidence was collected back in 1998 that was relevant to your follow-up investigation?
Sure, so there was actually a lot of evidence taken at that time. There were door frames, door handles, fire debris. There was a whole bunch of stuff that was taken, but the most important items that they were able to recover, one of those was a single .380 spent shell casing. There was also 2 projectiles that they recovered, and then there was a sexual assault kit that they performed on Linda during the time of her autopsy. Ultimately, those shell casing, or that shell casing and the sexual assault kit were the two most important kind of parts of this investigation and got us to the point where we are now.
When the fire department arrived and found Linda, they took great pains to preserve that scene as best as they could, knowing that we would be involved in investigating the case. They collected things, our forensic services unit collected items that back then maybe didn't, they weren't really able to do anything with. Technology, science was where it was in 1998, and so it took 27 years. But because of their efforts to preserve that evidence, we were able to do something with that evidence this long after the case. So it was pretty amazing. Their efforts were just sensational.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you worked with other agencies with that evidence to identify the person responsible for Miss Rutledge's death?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of odd, the timing of this. So back in probably the end of May, beginning of June, I started looking into Linda's case, just basically going through and reviewing the case file to see what new steps we could take, especially with the advancements in DNA technology and that kind of stuff. So I started looking at that case, and then on the 4th of July, we got an email from Detective Daniel Jackson with the Austin Police Department in Austin, Texas, saying that there was a potential shell casing match to incident they had that's famously known as the yogurt shop murders. So he was able to do what we call a NIBIN lead for that, where it basically says that those shell casings are the same, but we still need some further testing to confirm those. So about 2 weeks later, Detective Jackson and his team from Austin Police and also the Texas State Attorney General's office came up here. We basically collaborated on our cases, and that was kind of the start of how we got to where we are now. We sat down in a room for an entire day. We reviewed those case files, tried to find similarities outside of those shell casings in those files. And I would say at that time, unfortunately, that was really the only thing that we could come up with. So we kind of had to run with two different theories, that one, this actually could be related to the Austin case, or two, that it could be complete coincidence that somehow the gun that was used in the yogurt shop murders was also used in ours. Thankfully, we were able to get up to KSP Lab the next day, and they were able to kind of give us a preemptive confirmation that those shell casings were a match. So we knew that we were headed in the right direction. We later found out through the Austin Forensic Sciences Department that those shell casings 100% matched each other. But on top of that, they were also able to identify the projectiles as being fired from the same gun as well. So we knew that we were on the complete right track at that point. And then that's where DNA Labs International in Deerfield Beach, Florida came into play. We were actually able to send the sexual assault kit that was performed on Linda during the time of her autopsy. We were able to send that down to Florida, and they were able to put rush testing on that. And within a week, we were able to get a profile that matched the DNA profile from the yogurt shop murders case.
So who was the suspect identified as?
So Robert Eugene Brashers was ultimately identified as that suspect. He was well known to law enforcement at that time. He had 3 confirmed homicide victims at that point, 1 in South Carolina and 2 in Missouri. I believe it was earlier in 2018, 2019 when those cases were, when it was found out that he was responsible for those. And thankfully, the work that they did with those cases got us to a point where we could tie our case and the yogurt shop murders case to that. So at this point, we know that he has 8 confirmed victims, including Linda Rutledge and the yogurt shop murder victims. And we're pretty confident that there's probably more out there. And we would just encourage other departments to go back and look at those cases, especially from probably that 1995 to that 1998 standpoint, January of 1998 standpoint. and revisit those cases to see if kind of the MOs of those cases match up to what we have in ours.
Can you tell us why Robert Brashers was in Lexington at the time this occurred?
Yeah, so I think this is kind of the most perplexing thing about this case. Everything that we've been able to find through kind of his previous records and thankfully all of the research that these other departments have done on him, as well as speaking with family members of his, he really had no ties to Lexington in general. What we learned was that Robert owned his own construction company and that he would travel a lot for that construction company, mostly around the southern portion of the United States. We know all the way from at least Texas to South Carolina and everywhere in between. So I think at this point we can kind of speculate that maybe he was passing through here on work. But like I said before, there's nothing that definitively tied him to having previous relations to Lexington. But we are in a very centralized location with I-75 and I-64, and it's very easy to get here and it's very easy to leave here. So like I said, our belief is that he was probably traveling through, and unfortunately Linda was the person who he found here in Lexington.
So what does solving Linda's death mean to you, and most importantly for her family?
So I think I kind of led off with this, but Linda's case meant a whole lot to Ann and I to be able to solve, mostly because her family had to go 27 years without being able to know exactly what happened to her or who was responsible for doing it. And unfortunately, it took 27 years for the technology to advance enough that we could get to that point, but the best part about it was that we were actually able to. And it just goes to show that, especially with some of these other cases that we have too, that technology can be used for those. And I think this is just a stepping stone and just the beginning for us to be able to solve, especially the older cases like Linda's. But for me personally, to identify somebody such as Robert Eugene Brashers as being responsible for a death, I'm not sure as a detective that you can really have more of a height of pinnacle at that point. Like, everybody wants to identify a serial killer, and I was lucky enough to be able to do it as my first case. And it wasn't anything short of everybody being involved to make that happen. And I know in Lexington during that time, he's at least the third serial killer that we've identified just within probably a 5-year stretch, I would say.
I think that for me, most people that get into law enforcement do that to help their community, to help people, to resolve cases. You know, we fight crime, suppress evil. That's the goal. And when you can't resolve something, it becomes very frustrating. And when you can't resolve something for 27 years, you know, you keep reading the file, you keep looking at every detail, hoping that something will come to light. We use Crime Stoppers and put, you know, case information out in hopes of gathering more information, just gaining one more opportunity to solve that case. And so that call from Austin, where our shell casings matched, you know, that was some information that we could do something with and could run on. It opened up a whole new avenue of investigation for this case, and neither one of us ever dreamed that it would be resolved the way that it was. You know, that just wasn't on the radar. We really were looking. Linda was well loved by many people in this community. The initial investigators, they talked to so many people, and we really thought that someone in that circle that knew her did this to her. We didn't think it would end up the way that it did. And Linda's mother told us that she hoped that it was no one that knew her, because how could someone that knew her and loved her do that to her? So, you know, it was a shock for her as well, but there's some resolution there for her. And she was really happy knowing that she wasn't going to leave this world without knowing what happened to her daughter. So yeah, there's a lot of satisfaction that comes in being able to sit down with her and tell her what happened.
So what would either of you say to someone that's still waiting for justice for their loved ones?
Yeah, so I think I'll piggyback off what Ann said with that. With Linda's case, unfortunately, it took us 27 years to get to this point, and some of our cases, I think, could have the same outcome on them, that it's just going to take a little bit of time and effort and some new technology to come into play for us to be able to solve those. But the one thing that I can 100% guarantee to you is that when that stuff becomes available, we will revisit each and every single case that we have, and none are more important than the others. We treat all of the families of those victims equally, right? And we want to bring justice for every single one of those victims' families. Some cases are a lot harder to solve than others, and I think Ann would agree with me on that, and that's the unfortunate reality of that part. But we walk into the office every single day, and the only thing that we do is we investigate the unsolved cases. And we have a big shelf in our office that has all of those case files on it, and has her own room where she's working with all of those old case files. And it's not a second that we don't go throughout our day that we don't see all of those different case files, all the way from probably the early 70s all the way up until the most recent cases. So they're all on the table. We're always waiting for new information to come out with those. And that's why Crime Stoppers is such a huge part of this. There's several cases that I can tell you right now that Crime Stoppers has reopened some new leads in them, and some of these cases are over 20 years old at that point, and stuff that we had never known about before. So I wish there was a way that we could get across that Crime Stoppers is in fact completely anonymous, because I know there's some reluctancy out there to be able to give those tips and keep your name anonymous. But I 100% guarantee you that it is. Nobody ever knows your name. They never know your phone number. They never know your email address. They never know who you are when you get paid out that money by Crime Stoppers. Crime Stoppers doesn't even know themselves. It's a completely anonymous thing, and it's the easiest way for people to get information to us so that we can start running with that information.
We're hopeful every day. We come to work, even after 27 years, you know, you look at that file and you're hopeful every time you open it. And I would want families to not, to remember that we are still looking, we are still working. Our goal is to resolve that case, and it's not acceptable if it's not resolved as far as we're concerned. So we just keep working, and we keep hoping that every day we'll be able to call another family and tell them that there's some resolution to their loved one's case.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you both. Thank you for your hard work on this case. It just goes to show that good police work as well as advancements in technology are the most important things moving forward with some of these cases. I also would like to point out that information from the community is very important for these cases as well. So if anybody has any information, they are able to submit that through the Unsolved Homicide webpage, or if they're more comfortable, they can always anonymously submit any information to Crime Stoppers. Again, thank you both.